Now I want to introduce one of the authors of a new report being released today as part of the Skills to Compete campaign, a report that explains the need for renewed attention to our nation's middle skill jobs and the education and training that will be required to fill them. Dr. Harry Holzer, along with Robert Lerman, is the co-author of America's Forgotten Middle Skill Jobs, Education and Training Requirements in the Next Decade and Beyond. And the report is now available on the Skills to Compete website. And I want to give Harry a chance now to talk a little bit about the findings.
Thank you, Rachel. Good morning. We had the idea that when we make large decisions at the national level or at the state level about where to invest our scarce resources in education and training, that you need to keep an eye on the labor market to make sure that the resources invested in places where there are jobs and well-paying jobs available to folks. In the research literature on labor markets recently, there's been a lot of talk and a lot of metaphors used about the development of an hourglass economy or of a dumbbell labor market. Metaphors, all of which suggest that there's a growing top and a growing bottom, but not much left in the middle, and that will continue to occur in the future. The notion that the labor market will become more polarized. Now, if that's true, that would have really profound implications for what we do in terms of education and training in this country, and it really would be a statement that for folks in the lower to middle part of the current skills range, people who may not quite be ready for 4 or more years of college or may not be ready for engineering degrees and math degrees, it kind of suggests that there may not be much place for them in our economy, and that certainly we may not want to invest our scarce resources in them. So having a clear view of what this labor market looks like is very important for the discussion of education and training. And when I look at the research that's already been done, I had the sense that there was some truth to that notion. There has been some polarization in the labor market. There has been some thinning of the middle relative to the top and the bottom. But I also think that amount of thinning has been dramatically exaggerated, and that these metaphors like hourglass and dumbbell that imply that there's not going to be much of a middle in the future really may not accurately represent what's happened in the last 20 years or what the future projections really are. So my colleague Bob Lerman and I looked a little more closely at some of the data out there. We looked at data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics for the last 20 years, both on employment growth and on wage growth across occupational categories, the broad occupational categories, as well as some more detailed ones. And then we looked at some Bureau of Labor Statistics projections for roughly the next decade or so. There are limitations to each of these approaches, and we are quite upfront about those in our report, but we think you learn something from looking at each strand of those data, and certainly by looking at them together. So we did that, and it was a broad descriptive piece that we wrote together. What we broadly found is that despite some thinning of the middle, there remains a very robust middle of the labor market, and there will continue to remain a robust middle of the labor market, certainly over the next decade and well beyond that. We used several different definitions. Again, we focus mostly on broad occupational categories, as well as on some educational categories that BLS has developed. By whatever definition we had, we found that roughly 40 to 50% of current jobs, as well as jobs going forward in the future, will fall into that broad middle skills category, which, as Andy described, involves jobs that require some significant post-secondary education or training, though something short of a 4-year college degree. Where do you find these jobs? You find a lot of them in healthcare and in construction. You find some of them in manufacturing, in transportation and utilities, and in some parts of the service sector. In terms of what the jobs themselves are, a lot of them are technician jobs, or technician or technologist kinds of jobs. Some of them are the higher end of sales and clerical work. A lot of them are in that broad category that we used to call crafts, but now gets called installation, maintenance, and repair. Certainly the higher end of production jobs and even some service jobs all fall into this category. Now, as an economist and as most of us as sensible people, we know that what matters in the end to a lot of folks is not just the occupation, but also the wage. And of course, there's been a lot of widening of wage rates within each of these broad occupational categories, and in fact, some jobs that used to pay reasonably well no longer do. But even today, if you look at today's wages and the wages people expect for the future, individuals who have associate's degrees are still well compensated in the U.S. labor market. And in fact, the value of each year of college for people with an associate's degree is quite similar to the returns per year of a 4-year college degree. So the market is rewarding people with associate's degrees and with a variety of other post-secondary training certifications. So all of that information suggests that the middle remains very robust. Now, the other thing we did in this report is we looked a little bit at projections on the supply side for what numbers of workers in different skill categories we expect going forward. Here we relied pretty heavily on some projections developed at the Aspen Institute as part of their work a few years ago. And the Aspen numbers project a fairly major slowdown in the growth of education and of skills, certainly at the top, certainly among college graduates, but also in the middle of the skills distribution, as the baby boomers retire and as their places in the labor market are largely taken by immigrants. But as we looked at these numbers more closely and certainly questioned the assumptions on which they're based, we started to believe that, if anything, the supply slowdown might be even greater in the middle than at the very top. Because if you think about it, baby boomers who are highly educated, people with college degrees and graduate degrees, are in fact the people most likely to stretch out their working years and to retire later than the projections suggest. And those folks are much more likely to do that than people in the middle skill jobs. And if you look at the skill composition of immigrants, immigrants tend to be concentrated both at the top and at the bottom of the education spectrum, not nearly as much in the middle. So when you look at those projections and you make some adjustments for changes in behavior and changes in immigration flows, it really might be at the middle that the greater tightness occurs rather than at the top. And even if we look at some patterns in outsourcing, which is a relatively new phenomenon starting to pick up steam, even there you see some outsourcing of jobs at the top, you see some outsourcing of jobs at the bottom, like call center jobs, perhaps some in the middle, but large categories of middle skill jobs have not been outsourced and will not be outsourced to date, especially in the kinds of jobs that simply have to be done here at home, where the customers are or where the work will be located. One final thing, as an economist, I certainly believe that the private labor market adapts to all kinds of supply and demand adjustments, and private employers make all kinds of decisions on whom to recruit and how to screen and in whom to invest in training. But I also believe that those forces work very, very imperfectly, and if we rely exclusively on the private sector to generate the kinds of training and skills we need, that there's going to be big problems. The resources won't be available. In many other cases, there are market impediments. So we need to continue to invest public resources where the demand for skills will be greatest. And based on this work, I think that demand will be quite substantial for middle skill jobs as well as for those at the top.